This is a very early 750 Royal Enfield Interceptor, what you probably call an early Mark 1, and it's been out of action for some time, and I've recently started working on it and managed to get it running. It was fitted with an electronic ignition system in here driven off the crankshaft, and it's basically a little rotary magnet that runs around some coils, and there's a little notch in the magnet. Every time it goes past a pickup it'll create a spark, but unfortunately it had been damaged, and as well as a proper notch it had another little nick in the magnet. So when I first tried to start it, it was spitting and banging and popping and kicking back, and I think the additional accidental notch was playing up and interfering with the proper spark, but unfortunately that was ahead of the proper notch. So when everything appeared to be timed correctly, this second notch was getting there first and spoiling the ignition timing. So strobing it indicated that something was wrong, and I basically just had to take the rotor off and just keep moving it until eventually the engine would start and run, and once it was somewhere near, then I fine-tuned it, and I think it's within a couple of degrees of where it should be now. I haven't finally checked it for the finest tuning, but it's good enough to run the engine and make sure all is well. We've also had an oil leak, which I thought was coming from the centre joint of the crankcases behind the cylinder barrels at the bottom, which is a common place for Royal Enfield twins to leak from, and it looked pretty serious, and if it was that, it would have meant having to split the engine and separate the crankcases and deal with it. Then it appeared that it might have been coming from this union for the rocker feed pipe, because the oil I noticed was dripping off the bottom of it. So I attended to the washers and put new sealing washers on it and put it all back and tightened it up, and it was still leaking, and I couldn't really understand why. And I just happened to see that a pipe here had a bit of a shine to it while the engine was running, and I just rubbed my finger on it and realised it was oil, and the oil was actually coming from here. Where the pipe enters the banjo hadn't been soldered properly, and it was leaking, running down there and dripping off the bottom union and onto the crankcase. Like I say, at the first glance it looked like it was a leak from between the crankcases, and then I realised it may be coming from the union itself, which it wasn't. And finally I spotted this up here and resoldered it. My soldering's not that pretty, but it's prettier than an oil leak, and now it's oil tight. So I think the next thing to do is we'll start the engine up and have a listen to it. So if I put the camera over here, should stay put around there, so you get a good view of the bike. That'll be alright. Okay, and I'll give it a few kicks and hopefully it'll fire up for us. Getting wet with oil pretty quickly, and as you can see it's dry there now, so that seems to be that problem sorted out. It's running quite nicely as well, considering it's not tuned in 100% yet, but it's probably good enough to go for a short ride up the lane on and see how everything else works, like the clutch and the gearbox and the brakes and so on. So that'll be next in the pipeline, and then if and when I'm happy with it, go further afield. One other problem I have noticed on this one is there's a little bit of an oil leak in the gearbox. I put oil in the gearbox and I had to put virtually the total amount that they take for it to come out in the level plug. So I can assume that the gearbox was just about bone dry before I put oil in it, which would imply that it must have leaked out. I don't really think that anyone would have not bothered to put oil in it, considering there was oil in the engine, but you never know. So at the moment it's full of oil. How long it'll stay that way is anybody's guess. I'll keep an eye on it. Like I say, we'll have a short run up and down the lane, see how it all goes, and we'll take it from there. But it was a complete non-runner yesterday, so we're going the right way with it, and it's looking pretty promising. Yeah, I'm quite pleased with the way that's going, and once the rest of the jobs are done, it should be a pretty nice bike, that one.